So I'm going to do a quick response video to the Andy Edwards Rick Beato interview because I've been following Andy Edwards or watching his videos, I want to say for over a year now. And I think that they're very entertaining, and there's the clickbaity aspect where, 10 bands that he hates, 10 bands that are overrated, things like that. The last one that he had posted really kind of annoyed me because it's the main thrust of it was he was bad mouthing or complaining about Steely Dan, which I get. And then in that video, I was even kind of more, I wasn't really so much offended by, I'm being offended by YouTube videos. It's whatever. I mean, it's kind of stupid. But the sort of his dismissal of Electric Light Orchestra really struck me, and I wanted to comment, but I didn't think that, commenting on someone else's videos, it's like an Amazon review. No one really cares. So I was going to talk about that, but then I saw the Rick Beato video yesterday, and I realized that there's an interesting sort of talking past each other that those two guys have on a fundamental level. So basically, Rick Beato, and I made some notes. Rick Beato, when he's listening to music, he's really listening for three things. And I think the first thing he prioritizes is the songcraft, the songwriting. Then the second thing he prioritizes is the production. And then the third thing that on his list of priorities is sort of the technique and the execution that the musicians employ. That's like musicianship. And Andy Edwards, I realized, he is focused almost exclusively on technique and execution. And the thing that has kind of irked me about his takes on things is the fact that he's not really interested in songwriting at all. Now, he has this very us and them attitude, and the us for him would be fans of prog and fusion. I consider myself a bit of a fan of both prog and fusion. Probably more so than the casual listener. I don't love Mahavishnu Orchestra as much as he does, but Bitches Brew, Weather Report, Zappa's fusiony stuff like the Grand Wazoo, things like that, I really do like a lot. I really appreciate. So for him, it really is technique and execution, and the us is people that are really into the musicianship, and the them is the idea, the perceived literary critic who's found their way into music journalism. And so the three, or the artists that he dislikes the most, he dislikes Lou Reed, Patti Smith, Neil Young, Van Morrison, and he perceives these people as all being critics' darlings that he has to sort of take down from this musicianship-centered outlook. And first of all, I think that that's sort of an irrational sort of approach to things, because if you're going to hate on anything that music critics espouse, it's not so much if they're coming at it from an avant-garde perspective like Wire magazine, or they're coming at it from a literary perspective like someone who really appreciates Patti Smith or Lou Reed. It would be more, in my opinion, if the magazine or editorial or blog or whatever is doing if they're operating from a fashion perspective, where they're promoting something that is fashionable. I think that Andy Edwards doesn't really grasp that. He thinks that there's a sort of snobbish elitism that they sort of espouse. That was, you could really discern in the 80s and 90s and maybe aughts, but it's not really there anymore. It's really things that people are just they're keeping up with fashion, or they're promoting fashion, like bands like Geese or Wet Leg or whatever. Those are fashionable bands. I don't think that they're very interesting. I don't think they're really adding anything. They're not like in the level of musicality that like of Montreal would be or something. You know, they're cool bands to promote. They're fashionable. And I think that by him latching on to this idea that there's this literary sensibility that these critics have, and that's why they latch on to like the Velvet Underground, Lou Reed, Patti Smith. Not that he's giving them too much credit, but he's kind of missing the point. And then I want to just, as I'm gonna, because I want this to be a short video. The last thing that he's doing, the last point I want to make in regards to the fact that he's not really attuned to songwriting, he's not really interested in songwriting, is by talking about not so much his hatred of Van Morrison, but his hatred of like, I don't know if he hates them, but like his dislike of Neil Young and Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan and Neil Young they're not just like quintessential songwriters, especially Dylan, because Dylan is somebody who can really make a song out of a really simple chord progression. It's also the fact that like someone like Neil Young, a lot of times what Neil Young does and did when he was at his peak in the 70s and into the 80s, and he could hit it occasionally again in the 90s and whatnot, is Neil Young kind of gets a vibe, and he's able to mine a mood or a vibe sort of consistently for a whole album, like Tonight's the Night. And I think that my irritation with Andy Edwards and a lot of his videos has been really disabused by the realization that he's not really interested in songcraft. He's not really interested in like the mood of an album or the vibe. Those things don't really grab him. He likes things that musically kind of astound and surprise and engage him from where he's coming from. And I think that I come at it not really from that. I mean, I've heard Alan Haldsworth and things Robert Fripp did and stuff where I'm like, oh, that's really great. But like Robert Fripp on like Starless, I love the ending of that, and I think the buildup and everything is so great. But like, if it wasn't within the context of that song and the mood that that song has out on that album, Red, it wouldn't really be captivating for me. So I think that, returning to the point of the video, is I think that Rick Beato really appreciates Andy Edwards' musicianship and he appreciates his humor, but Rick Beato is just excessively generous generally, and Andy Edwards is excessively miserly. You know, he's really only looking for musicianship and technique and execution, and he's not really interested in songcraft. And that's a thing that, and their interview there, I think any of the awkward sort of moments in the interview, they relate to the fact that Rick Beato really prioritizes songcraft and songwriting on a multifaceted level, and that Andy Edwards, not that he doesn't appreciate it, he just kind of doesn't grasp it, or like why someone would like it, you know. And it's not it's not so much an issue of like, so like, I guess I'm getting to the point of like, it would be pointless to argue with Andy Edwards, because you know, he's like, it's like trying to tell a plumber about what's so great about like Formula One racing. Neither one of those things I have any interest in. It's just a totally different, it's like a totally different sort of like world to inhabit. And then also, I guess it kind of, knowing this, it kind of mitigates my irritation with the guy moving forward, because he said, one of the things he said in the Steely Dan video was, he just said, you don't need ELO if the Beatles had kept going. But like, in a lot of ways, ELO did things that were I love the Beatles, but like ELO did things that were significantly like greater in their own right than the Beatles, like Livin' Thing. I mean, that's just an amazing song. And that's really just Jeff Lynne. That's like the unique artistry that comes, it's part and parcel of Jeff Lynne's songwriting. And I don't think that Andy Edwards has the vocabulary or the interest to develop the vocabulary to appreciate songwriting in that respect. I think he likes instrumentals and things. And it's also kind of interesting, just as an aside, that he did a video where he was like kind of dissing classical music, and classical music would be sort of like the purest distillation of what he's interested in, you know, and yet he kind of was like, classical music. Well, I guess classical music and jazz, they both offer sort of a distillation of what he wants. So yeah, I'm not really, it was an interesting interview to watch, but I think they were kind of talking past each other. That's what people would say in like philosophy departments, is two people talking past each other. I did enjoy it, but that's just my thoughts on it. I wonder if Rick Beato sort of realized that too, like that Andy Edwards was looking for something very different in music than Rick Beato sort of does. Anyway, so that's the end of the video. And I don't know if I'm going to keep doing these just because, like, this is my band channel. But if you like, you can like it, comment, subscribe. Maybe I'll keep doing more. And then listen to the Happy Casualties. That's my band. All right, thanks.